The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the endless Kansas wheat fields when Tom Miller noticed something wasn't right. The wheat stalks were moving, but there was no wind. He stood at the edge of his field, coffee mug in hand, and watched as the golden stems swayed in an unnatural pattern, like ripples in a pond. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a strange cloud, darker than the others, and perfectly still in the sky. But clouds didn't have lights running along their edges, and they certainly didn't cast shadows that made perfect circles on the wheat below. Tom rubbed his eyes, wondering if he'd had too little sleep or too much coffee. The object in the sky wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting clearer as the sun rose higher. It was massive, at least a mile wide, and shaped like a giant silver dollar hanging in the air. The metal surface caught the morning light and sparkled like a diamond. He wasn't sure who to call about something like this. The police would think he was crazy. The news stations might laugh at him. But he knew what he was seeing was real because his old dog Buck was staring at it too, his ears perked up and tail straight as an arrow. Before Tom could make up his mind, his phone started ringing. It was his neighbor, Bob, who lived 3 miles down the road. "Tom, are you seeing this?" Bob's voice was shaky. "Tell me I'm not going crazy." "If you're crazy, then I'm crazy too," Tom replied, his eyes still fixed on the huge craft. "And so are my crops, my dog, and probably half the county by now." As they talked, more lights appeared around the edge of the ship. They were brighter now, pulsing with a blue-white glow that reminded Tom of the LED lights he'd installed in his barn last summer. The ship wasn't making any noise. No humming, no engines, nothing. Just silence, and those strange lights. Suddenly, smaller objects started dropping from the main ship. They looked like teardrops made of silver, each one about the size of a small plane. These smaller ships spread out in different directions, some heading east, others west. Tom counted at least 20 of them before they disappeared into the distance. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Bob. It was an emergency alert. "Stay calm. Remain indoors. Government officials are aware of DTE situation." Tom almost laughed. Stay calm. There was a spaceship bigger than his entire farm hovering over his wheat field. The sound of helicopters filled the air. Military choppers appeared on the horizon, their black shapes tiny compared to the alien vessel. Fighter jets screamed overhead, circling the massive ship but keeping their distance. Tom wondered what those pilots were thinking, seeing something like this up close. He should have been scared. Any normal person would be terrified seeing something like this, but Tom felt strangely calm. Maybe it was his years of farming, dealing with things he couldn't control like weather and crop prices, or maybe it was just his practical nature. Whatever was up there, panicking wouldn't help. News vans started appearing on the road near his farm. Reporters with cameras and microphones were getting out, pointing at the sky and talking rapidly into their phones. Tom knew his quiet morning was over. He took one last sip of his now cold coffee and headed back to the house to change out of his work clothes. As he reached his porch, a bright beam of light suddenly shot down from the ship, touching the ground right in the middle of his wheat field. It didn't burn or destroy anything. The wheat just swayed gently in the light, like it was underwater. Tom stood there, watching, as the light began to pulse in a steady rhythm. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. Whatever these visitors were, they had chosen his farm, his piece of America, as their first contact point. And somehow, deep in his gut, Tom knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Buck walked up beside him and sat down, leaning against his leg like he always did when he sensed something big was about to happen. Tom reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Well, boy," he said quietly, "looks like we're about to have ourselves an interesting day." The military had turned Tom's barn into their temporary command center. Trucks, tents, and communication equipment now covered the area where he usually parked his tractor. Soldiers moved back and forth. talking into radios and staring at screens, showing the massive ship that still hung silently over the wheat fields. Dr. Jack Wilson arrived in a plain black car, looking out of place in his wrinkled tweed jacket among all the uniforms. He was a language professor from a small college in Nebraska who had been teaching the same courses for 20 years. Now he found himself being rushed into a military briefing about first contact with an alien civilization. "We need you because you specialize in pattern recognition in languages," General Roberts explained, pointing to strange symbols that had appeared on the side of the alien ship. "These markings started showing up an hour ago. We need to know what they mean." Jack adjusted his glasses and studied the photographs. The symbols seemed to shift and change, like water flowing into different shapes. They reminded him of the way his students' handwriting changed throughout the semester, becoming more confident and personal. Before he could share his thoughts, a soldier burst into the barn. "Sir, the ship is broadcasting something." Everyone rushed to the screens, where a new message was appearing in plain English. "We request dialogue with American representatives." The general turned to Jack. "Looks like they figured out our language faster than we could figure out theirs." He handed Jack a bulletproof vest. "Congratulations, Professor. You're now our Chief Communication Officer." A small platform had descended from the ship, hovering about 10 feet above the wheat field. 3 figures stood on it, waiting. They looked surprisingly human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But their skin had a slight bluish tint, and their eyes were larger than normal. They wore simple white clothing that seemed to flow like liquid. Jack walked toward them with Tom at his side. The military had insisted on keeping the farmer involved since it was his land, and honestly, Jack was glad for the company. Tom's calm presence made the whole situation feel less surreal. "Welcome to Earth," Jack said, his professor's voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am Dr. Jack Wilson, and this is Tom Miller. We represent the United States of America." The tallest alien stepped forward. Its voice was clear and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We are the Stellar Council. We have been watching your planet for many centuries." The alien's mouth didn't move. The words seemed to form directly in their minds. "Why have you chosen to reveal yourselves now?" Jack asked. "And why specifically to America?" The second alien moved forward, its large eyes reflecting the morning sun. "Your nation possesses something unique, something we have lost. We have traveled across many galaxies to find it again." Tom spoke up for the first time, his practical farmer's mind cutting straight to the point. "What exactly are you looking for?" The third alien raised its hand, and a hologram appeared in the air between them. It showed scenes from American history: the Wright brothers' first flight, Edison's laboratory, a kid's science fair project, mechanics working in their garages, artists in their studios. "Your people have a quality we once had but have forgotten," the first alien explained. "You solve problems in ways our computers cannot predict. You create art that serves no logical purpose. You build machines in ways that defy conventional wisdom. We need to understand how you do this." Jack and Tom exchanged glances. Of all the reasons they had imagined for an alien visit, invasion, resources, scientific study, this hadn't even made the list. "You want to learn how to be creative?" Jack asked, making sure he understood correctly. "Our civilization has achieved nearly perfect efficiency," the second alien said. "But we have lost something essential in the process. We have lost the ability to think, what you call outside the box." Tom couldn't help but smile. All this advanced technology, this incredible display of power, and what these beings really wanted was to learn how to think like humans, like Americans. The third alien stepped forward, its voice carrying the note of what sounded like hope. "Will you help us remember how to imagine?" Inside the alien ship, everything was both beautiful and strange. The walls seemed to breathe, changing colors slowly from white to soft blue, and back again. Tom and Jack followed their alien guides through corridors that formed themselves as they walked, the floor solid beneath their feet despite looking like flowing water. The Stellar Council had shown them their problem in a way neither man had expected. In a large circular room, they displayed a hologram of their home world. It was perfect, too perfect. Every building was exactly the same height. Every garden had exactly the same number of plants, and every vehicle moved in exactly the same way. Our world runs with complete efficiency, the lead alien explained, its voice carrying a hint of sadness. Our computers make all decisions based on pure logic, but we are dying inside. The hologram changed to show empty art galleries, closed music halls, and children sitting quietly in identical rows, never playing or laughing. Tom walked around the hologram, studying it with a farmer's practical eye. "Reminds me of when they tried to make all the corn grow exactly the same way," he said. "Looked good on paper, but the crops weren't strong. No variety meant no resistance to problems." Jack nodded, understanding what Tom meant. "You've lost your ability to adapt," he said to the aliens. "When everything is perfect, there's no room for growth or change." The second alien stepped forward, creating another hologram. This one showed their medical labs, where they were studying the strange problem. Their people were becoming less interested in everything. Children weren't asking questions anymore. Adults weren't coming up with new ideas. Their entire civilization was slowly grinding to a halt. "We first noticed Earth because of your radio and television signals," the third alien explained. "They were chaotic, filled with music and stories that served no logical purpose. Then we saw how you solved problems." The hologram changed again, showing clips they'd collected over years of watching Earth. A mechanic fixing a car with duct tape and wire. A teacher using games to help students learn math. A farmer rigging up an irrigation system with old pipes and spare parts. Each solution was different, creative, and completely unpredictable to their advanced computers. "Your people, especially in America, have a gift for what you call making do," the first alien said. "You take broken things and make them work in new ways. You see problems as challenges, not failures. We have lost this ability." Tom looked at the perfect alien city again and scratched his chin. "Well, first thing you need to do is stop making everything the same," he said. "Nature doesn't work that way. Every plant in my field is a little different. And that's good. Helps them survive when things get tough." Jack added his own thoughts, drawing from his years of teaching. "Creativity comes from constraints and problems. When everything is perfect, there's no reason to think differently. No reason to imagine new possibilities." The aliens absorbed this information with great interest. Their large eyes blinked in unison as they processed these simple but powerful ideas. The lead alien touched a wall, and it rippled like a pond, changing to a deep purple color. "We have brought 4 of our young ones," it said. "They show signs of what we call irregularity. They ask questions. They do things differently. On our world, this was seen as a flaw. Now we think they might be our hope." Through a doorway that hadn't been there before, 4 smaller aliens entered. They moved differently from the adults, less rigid, more curious. One of them was touching the walls, making patterns in the changing colors. Another was walking in a zigzag pattern, breaking the perfect order of movement the adults always showed. Tom smiled at them, reminded of his own children when they were young, always exploring and testing boundaries. "Well," he said, "looks like you've got some good raw material to work with. Sometimes the best crops come from the seeds that don't follow the rules." The young aliens moved closer, clearly fascinated by the 2 humans. One of them reached out and touched Tom's worn denim jacket, then pulled back quickly, surprised by the rough texture so different from their smooth surroundings. Jack watched this interaction with growing understanding. "I think," he said slowly, "this is going to be about much more than just teaching creativity. We're going to have to help them remember how to be surprised by the world." The next morning, the aliens set up their first test in Tom's barn. They had cleared out all the military equipment and replaced it with something that looked like a giant puzzle box. It was about the size of a tractor, covered in shifting panels and glowing lines. Two more people had joined Tom and Jack for this challenge: Mary Thompson, an elementary school art teacher, and Bill Roberts, a retired mechanic from the nearby town. "This is a standard educational device from our world," the lead alien explained. "All our young ones must solve it to prove their logical thinking. None of them have ever solved it in less than 3 days. We want to see how you approach it." Bill walked around the device, tapping it with his wrench. "Looks like it needs to be opened," he said, "but there's no clear way in. No screws, no hinges, nothing to grip." The old mechanic had spent 50 years fixing everything from tractors to toasters, and he'd never seen anything quite like this. Mary watched the patterns flowing across the surface. As an art teacher, she had a good eye for colors and movement. "The lights seem to follow our movements," she said, "like it's watching us." Tom noticed something else. "Those panels remind me of my grain silo doors. They're meant to slide, not pull." He reached out and gently pushed one of the panels. It moved slightly, changing the pattern of lights. Jack studied the symbols that appeared when the panel moved. "These marks, they're not just decoration. They're telling us something." He pulled out a notebook and started sketching the patterns, trying to find meaning in their changes. The aliens watched silently as the 4 Americans circled their puzzle, each seeing it through different eyes. The young aliens had joined them, their large eyes full of curiosity as they watched these strange humans work. "Well," Bill said finally, pulling a roll of duct tape from his pocket, "when in doubt, start simple." He tore off a piece of tape and stuck it to one of the moving panels. Now they could see how that section moved in relation to the others, even when the patterns changed. Mary had brought her art supplies and started marking different sections with colored chalk. "If we color code the movements," she explained, "we might see a pattern." Soon the device looked like a rainbow, with different colored marks tracking how each part shifted. Tom walked over to his toolbox and came back with a spray bottle of WD-40. "Everything works better with a little lubricant," he said with a grin, carefully spraying the edges of the panels that seemed to stick. Jack had filled 3 pages with notes about the changing symbols. "These patterns, they're like a language, but they're also like music. They repeat in specific ways." He started humming the pattern he saw, and suddenly one of the panels slid open with a soft click. The young aliens made excited chirping sounds, moving closer to watch. One of them picked up a piece of chalk and started copying Mary's color coding on another section. Another watched Bill's duct tape technique with fascination. Working together, the team kept making progress. Bill's practical tricks, Mary's color system, Tom's farming knowledge, and Jack's pattern recognition slowly unlocked the puzzle's secrets. They weren't following the logical steps the aliens expected. They were trying everything, making mistakes, learning from them, and trying again. After 4 hours of work, with chalk dust everywhere, duct tape on half the panels, and WD-40 making everything slippery, the final panel slid open. Inside was a simple crystal that glowed with all the colors they had used to solve the puzzle. The lead alien's eyes had grown even larger. 4 hours, it said in amazement. "You solved it in 4 hours, using methods our computers cannot even classify. You made it messy." Bill wiped his hands on his overalls. Sometimes messy is the best way to get things done. Mary looked at their colorful creation. "It's actually quite beautiful now. Like an art project." Tom nodded. "Reminds me of my tool shed. Everything's a bit messy, but I know exactly how it all works." Jack closed his notebook, smiling at the young aliens who were now trying to put duct tape on everything they could reach. "I think they're starting to understand. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the cleanest or most logical. Sometimes you need to make a mess to find the answer." The aliens started setting up their next test, but the humans noticed something had changed. The walls of the ship around them had stopped being perfectly smooth and white. They now had subtle patterns, like waves in a pond, and here and there, a splash of color had appeared. The next series of challenges took place over several days. Each time, The aliens presented what they considered impossible problems, and each time, the human team found ways to solve them using everyday items and simple thinking. The young aliens watched everything, learning more from the humans' failures than their successes. Today's problem was about growing food. The aliens showed them a hologram of their farming systems, huge, perfect domes where every plant grew exactly the same way. But recently, their crops had started failing, and their computers couldn't figure out why. Tom walked through the hologram, looking at the identical plants. "Well, there's your problem right there," he said, pulling a sandwich bag of seeds from his pocket. "These are from my best wheat plants. Look at them. They're all a little different. That's how it should be." He poured the seeds into his palm, showing them to the aliens. In nature, every seed is special. Some grow better in wet years, some in dry years. Some grow tall, some stay short. When you make everything the same, one problem can kill all your crops. The young aliens gathered around, touching the seeds carefully. One of them dropped a seed, and instead of picking it up perfectly like their adults would have done, they let it roll away, watching with interest as it followed an unpredictable path. Mary had brought her art supplies again and started drawing pictures of different plants. "Look at these flowers," she said, showing her sketches to the young aliens. "In my garden, some are red, some are yellow, some are tall, some are short. That's what makes it beautiful." Vil was examining the aliens' farming machines through the hologram. "Too complicated," he said, shaking his head. "Best tools are simple tools. Like this." He pulled out a small pocket knife and showed how it could cut, dig, and even work as a screwdriver. The young aliens were fascinated by how one simple tool could do so many things. Jack had been quiet, watching the young aliens' reactions. "You know what I notice?" he said to the adult aliens. "Your young ones are starting to play. They're not just following rules anymore. They're exploring, trying things out, making mistakes. That's how creativity starts." The lead alien's eyes changed color slightly. Something the humans had learned meant surprise or strong emotion. Play is not logical. It serves no clear purpose, but you say it is important. Tom nodded, remembering his own children growing up on the farm. "Most important thing there is. Kids need to get dirty, break things, fix things, try crazy ideas. That's how they learn what works and what doesn't." Just then, one of the young aliens picked up Mary's chalk and started drawing on the ship's wall. The adult aliens moved to stop it, but Bill held up his hand. "Let them be," he said. "Watch what happens." The drawing wasn't perfect. It was messy and crooked, nothing like the precise patterns the aliens usually made, but it was original. Soon, the other young aliens joined in, adding their own marks to the wall. The ship's surface, instead of correcting itself back to perfect smoothness, kept the drawings. Mary smiled, watching the impromptu art session. "See, they already know how to create. They just needed permission to try." The adult aliens observed this activity with growing interest. The walls of the ship around them had started changing more dramatically now, developing textures and patterns that weren't perfectly symmetrical. Even the lights had started to vary, creating warm and cool spots instead of uniform illumination. "Our ship," one of the adult aliens said with wonder, "it's responding to them. To their creativity. This has never happened before." Tom picked up a piece of chalk himself and drew a simple flower on the wall. One of the young aliens immediately added more petals, making it their own. "Sometimes," Tom said, "you just need to show them it's okay to be different." The lead alien touched the wall where the drawings were, feeling the rough chalk under its fingers. "We begin to understand," it said softly. "Perfect is not always better. Different is not always wrong. These are difficult concepts for us, but we are learning." Jack watched as the young aliens continued to draw, their movements becoming more confident, more playful. "That's the real secret," he said. "It's not about teaching them to be creative. It's about showing them it's safe to try new things, to make mistakes, to be imperfect. As weeks passed, the aliens began learning more about American culture, not just through formal tests, but through everyday experiences. Tom had invited them to visit his farmhouse, and now the kitchen table had become an unexpected classroom in human creativity. The adult aliens watched in fascination as Tom's wife Betty taught one of the young aliens how to bake cookies. The process seemed chaotic to them. A pinch of this, a dash of that, each batch turning out slightly different. Their own food was produced in perfectly measured units, always exactly the same. But how do you know it's correct if each one is different? An adult alien asked, watching Betty and the young alien decorate cookies with colorful frosting. That's the fun part, Betty said, laughing as the young alien covered a cookie with probably too much sprinkles. Sometimes the mistakes taste better than the perfect ones. The young alien's eyes lit up at this idea, and it began experimenting with even more unusual color combinations. Meanwhile, in the garage, Bill was teaching another group about what he called garage engineering. He had laid out a collection of odd tools and spare parts on his workbench. The aliens were particularly puzzled by his large collection of coffee cans filled with random nuts, bolts, and wire. "Never throw anything away," Bill explained, digging through a coffee can to find just the right-sized bolt. "You never know when something broken can become part of something new." He showed them how he had fixed his lawnmower with parts from an old bicycle and some baling wire. The young aliens were fascinated by how things could be used in ways they weren't originally designed for. Mary had set up an art station in the barn, where she was teaching the aliens about abstract painting. The adult aliens struggled with the concept of art that didn't represent anything specific, but the young ones dove right in. They mixed colors randomly, splashed paint in unexpected ways, and even started using things like leaves and feathers to make patterns. "See," Mary said to the adults, holding up a particularly chaotic but vibrant painting made by one of the young aliens. "Art isn't about being perfect. It's about expressing what you feel." The adult aliens tilted their heads, trying to understand how something so messy could also be beautiful. Jack spent his time documenting everything, noticing how the aliens' language was starting to change. Their once perfectly structured speech patterns were becoming more relaxed, more natural. They had begun using human expressions like "pretty good" and "let's give it a try," phrases that would have seemed illogical to them before. One afternoon, they all gathered for something Tom called a proper American cookout. He fired up his old charcoal grill, which the aliens found incredibly primitive compared to their food production systems, but they couldn't deny the wonderful smell of grilling burgers and corn on the cob. The young aliens had fully embraced human-style play by now. They ran through the sprinkler Tom used to water his garden, shrieking with joy at the cold water. They helped Betty pick flowers for the table, choosing blooms that didn't match but somehow looked good together. They even tried to help Tom flip burgers on the grill, though that required some careful supervision. The adult aliens watched all this activity with growing understanding. Their own bodies had begun to change subtly. Their movements were less rigid, their eye colors shifted more freely with their emotions, and some had even started showing preferences for certain foods over others. "We have lived for centuries believing that perfection was the highest goal," the lead alien said to Tom as they watched the young ones play. "But in just a few weeks, you have shown us that imperfection can be perfect in its own way." Bill nodded, flipping a slightly burnt burger that he claimed would taste better that way. "Life's too short to worry about everything being just right," he said. "Sometimes you gotta just work with what you've got and make the best of it." As the sun began to set, casting orange and purple streaks across the Kansas sky, humans and aliens sat together at picnic tables in Tom's backyard. They ate slightly crooked cookies, admired uneven art projects, and shared stories about their different worlds. The young aliens had frosting on their faces and paint on their hands, looking nothing like the perfect beings they were supposed to be. And that was exactly right. The big silver ship had been floating above Tom's farm for 3 months now. The wheat fields below it had grown tall and golden, ready for harvest. But today was special. The Stellar Council was making their final decision about Earth and their future relations with humans. The ship's main meeting room had changed dramatically since their first visit. The walls now showed a mix of alien patterns and human artwork. The young aliens had insisted on hanging some of their paintings next to the ship's control panels. Even the lights had developed a warm, slightly uneven glow that felt more like sunset than the harsh, perfect brightness of before. "We have reached several conclusions," the lead alien announced to the gathered group. Tom, Jack, Bill, Mary, and Betty sat in comfortable chairs they'd brought from Tom's house. The aliens had finally admitted that their perfect seating wasn't actually very comfortable. First, the alien continued, "We wish to establish a permanent cultural exchange program. Our civilization needs what you have taught us." Its eyes shifted to a warm blue color, something they'd learned meant happiness. "We would like to make this farm our primary base of operations, if Tom and Betty agree." Betty reached over and squeezed Tom's hand. They'd already discussed this possibility. "Well," Tom said with a smile, "we've got plenty of space, and I reckon those young ones of yours need a proper place to get creative." The lead alien nodded, then continued. "Second, we have seen significant changes in our young ones who have been here." On cue, the young aliens burst into the room, their movements fluid and natural. One was wearing a baseball cap backwards, another had decorated its skin with washable markers, and all of them had bits of hay stuck to their clothes from playing in the barn. "They are different now," another adult alien observed, "but not in a bad way. They solve problems faster than our computers. They think of solutions we would never imagine. They play." The last word was said with a mixture of wonder and acceptance. Bill chuckled as one of the young aliens showed off a contraption it had built from spare tractor parts and bits of alien technology. "Looks like they've learned the fine art of making something from nothing," he said proudly. Mary pointed to the walls, where the young aliens had started teaching their art techniques to other aliens who had recently arrived from their homeworld. "They're not just learning anymore, they're teaching others. That's how culture grows." Jack had been taking notes through the whole meeting, as usual. "Your language has evolved too," he observed. "You're using metaphors now, speaking more naturally. You're not just communicating information, you're sharing ideas." The lead alien nodded, then made an announcement that surprised everyone. "We have also begun making changes on our homeworld. Our cities are becoming less uniform. Our schools are introducing play-based learning. Some of our adults are even starting to—" It paused, as if still amazed by this development. "Take up hobbies." Tom stood up and walked to the window, looking out over his wheat fields. The alien ship's shadow had left a perfect circle where the wheat grew differently. Not better or worse, just different. "Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places," he said. "Like aliens landing in a wheat field in Kansas." Betty had brought cookies for everyone, and now both humans and aliens sat together, enjoying the slightly burnt edges of some and the extra soft centers of others. The young aliens were teaching the adults how to dump cookies in milk, a skill they'd learned from Tom's grandkids during a visit. "You know," Bill said, watching the scene, "I reckon this is what America's really about. Not just the big stuff like freedom and democracy, but the little things. Making do with what you have. Trying new things. Not being afraid to fail sometimes." Mary nodded, helping the young alien clean paint off its hands. "And passing those ideas on to others, even if they're from another planet." Outside, the sound of children laughing drifted up from below. Tom's grandchildren had come to visit again, and they were teaching the young aliens how to play baseball in the farm's front yard. The adult aliens watched in fascination as the kids argued about rules, made up new ones, and celebrated both home runs and spectacular misses with equal joy. "I believe," the lead alien said softly, "we finally understand why we had to come to America. Not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't trying to be. And that's exactly what we needed to learn.